Hey guys, my name is Frank, and this is the Poth on Programming video log, part 6 of how to make a tile-based platformer in pure HTML5 and JavaScript. This video is going to be about loading JSON levels with doors. You're definitely going to want this functionality in your game, so stay tuned to find out how it's done. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create level data files using JSON, how to load level data and use it to populate the game world, and finally, how to trigger subsequent level loads by colliding with doors. If you have any comments or questions, be sure to leave them in the comments section, and if you start learning at any point during this video, go ahead and give a thumbs up so others can find it as well. Let's take a look at what has changed since part 5 and part 5.5. So this is part 6, and everything is basically the same. I did make quite a few changes, but most of those changes pertain to loading different levels. So when I jump up into this area here and walk off the side of the screen, it's actually going to load a different level, as you just saw. So how this is working is I have a little door hit region just off the right of the screen here, and it's just a rectangular box, and when the player character's center point hits that box, it loads the level and places the player in whatever location he needs to be to start this level out when walking through that door from the other level. So basically in part 6, I just have a couple different levels, and I've defined a couple different types of doors. They're all just rectangles. You just saw 2 small rectangular doors. This area on the bottom of this level is one big rectangular door, so I can jump up through it at any point in this rectangle. So this system works great for any size door. It doesn't just have to be one tile. It can be any size rectangle that you define. So that's basically part 6. So now that you know what the example program is about, let's get into how this works. Before we get into the JavaScript code, let's actually take a look at the different level files. So this would be level 00, or I call it zone 00. So the file to load this level that you see on the screen is this file right here, zone 00, and basically it's just a couple of different JSON structures. So I have a doors array, and inside of that I just have the doors that are contained in this level. So for this level, level 00 or zone 00, I have one door just to the right of this tile. The door would be right here off the level that you see on the screen. And this JSON here defines an array of doors, and this object inside of it will be that door object that resides right over here. So that's my doors array. Down here I have some information about the maps. Each map has 12 columns and 9 rows. I did not format this so you could actually see it in kind of a 2D row and column format. I just have it in one big long array, but if I were to line this up so each row had 12 columns in it, you would see that the maps are 12 columns by 9 rows. But this is my graphics map, so these are all my graphics tile values. This is my collision map, so these are all the collision values for the tiles. And then finally I have ID, and that's just going to be the level ID. So like I said, this is zone 00. So when I load zone 00, this just tells my world object that it's zone ID 00. So now let's take a look at zone 2, and we'll just take a look at zone 2's code really quick, just so you get it in your head that this is what the format is. So here's my doors array. Zone 2 has 2 doors. There's a door right here to go back into zone 0, or actually it's zone 1, excuse me, because I start labeling as 0, but this is zone 1, and it leads back into zone 00. There's a door right off the left side of the screen here, and it goes into zone 02 with a door right over here on the far right side of the screen. So inside of my doors array, I have defined 2 door objects, and then same as before, I have my columns and rows and my 2 maps and the ID that just indicates what zone this is. So if you know how to write JavaScript, you know how to write JSON for the most part. It's really easy, and it's a really great natural fit for writing information that you're going to load into your JavaScript game, because it's so similar to JavaScript already, and you have the built-in JSON.parse method to parse this information into usable JavaScript objects. So now that you know how to write the level data, let's get on to the next part of the video. Okay, so now that we know how to define our level data, we need to figure out a way to load it. And the best way to load it is with XML Http Request. So inside of my main.js file, I have a class called Assets Manager, and it basically just has a function called request JSON inside of it. So in order to load my JSON file, I'm going to call this request.json function. I'm going to pass in the URL of the file to load. So basically, if I want to load zone00, I'm going to pass in the string zone00.json, and I'm going to provide a callback function, but I'll get to the callback function later. So first thing I'm going to do is create an XML Http request. I'm going to give it an event listener for the load event, and I'm going to have an event handler for when it loads, which is just going to call my callback and hand in the parsed JSON string from my JSON file. So I'm going to send off my request to the server. It's going to process it. It's going to hand me back the file content. Remember that file was zone00.json. It's literally going to hand back this stuff in response text or just text format. And I'm going to take that response text or the content of my JSON file. I'm going to use JSON.parse to turn it into a JavaScript object, and I'm going to call the callback. So that's the request.json file that we're going to use to actually load our data. So now let's take a look at where we first load up a level when we first start the game. And that's going to happen all the way at the bottom of the main.js file in the initialization section. So this is where we're using the request.json file to load up our very first level. So when I click refresh, my code is going to run in main.js, and this right here is going to be responsible for loading up zone00, which is on the screen right here. So let's just take a look at what we're handing in. Calling assetsmanager.request.json, zone prefix, that's just going to be the string zone for the first part of our URL. Game.world.zoneID, when I first instantiate game, it creates an object called world. So game.world is a world object, and that has a default value in it of 00 for world 00 or zone 00. So that's where we're going to get the 00 from. This is going to be 00. And zone suffix is just going to be .json. So I have the zone prefix of zone plus the game.world.zoneID, which is 00, plus zone suffix, which is going to be .json. So I'm going to hand in that URL to request.json. It's going to send a request to the server. When the server returns the JSON data inside of zone00 in text format, I'm going to parse it into a JavaScript object, and then I'm going to hand that JavaScript object into my callback function, which is just going to be defined here. I defined it in arrow function format. So this is my callback function, and remember that I passed in JSON.parse request.response text. So that's going to be the JavaScript object that I created from my zone file. And I'm going to hand that into game.world.setup. So let's go ahead and take a look real quick at game.world.setup, and also where we create the very first default value for zone ID. So let me see if I can find where I'm at here. I'm inside of the game file, and this is the game.world.prototype. So let's go up a little bit more. Game.world. This is where we define game.world. Let me real quick just take a look at the default value for zone ID. So remember, the default value for zone ID, we're going to use that right here when we're loading our first level. So that's just going to be defined right here. Right now the default value is 00, so when I refresh the page, the first level it loads is 00. If I change that to say 01 and save it, refresh the page, keep an eye on the level map, it's going to load up world 01. If I change it again, let's go world 02, save, we're going to load up, and it's going to immediately, well, it dropped us in world 2, but we fell down into world 3. So basically this sets our default level to load initially when we boot up the game. So that's where we define that, but now we're going to take a look at game.world.setup, where we actually put all the information from our zone file into our game.world object, which we use on every frame of animation to do stuff with our game. So down here is the setup function. This is game.world.setup, and it takes one parameter, which is the zone, which we just parsed into a JavaScript object from our zone00.json file. So basically, all we do is copy over all the values from our newly created zone object, and we copy those values into our world object. Pretty simple. The only one we don't copy directly is the doors array, and the reason for that is because I want to use a door object that I defined. I'll talk about that in the next part, but we do loop through all the doors in the zone's doors array, and we just create a new door from the doors that we loop through. So inside of this zone file, we have an array called doors. Every object inside we get, and we convert this data into a game.door object. So this class here, we're just going to create a door object from the door data inside of our zone.doors array. So whatever door we loop over in that doors array is going to be converted into a game.door class, and that's what we're going to use for our actual game logic and game physics when we collide with the doors and stuff. Now, we finally know how we're setting up the very first initial level. I'm getting out of breath here, I'm talking so much, but now we need to know one more thing, and that's how to actually go ahead and load a level on the fly when we walk into a door. So where we do that is inside of the update function for the game. So on every cycle of our game engine, on every game loop, so to speak, we're going to call this function from inside of main, and this is the update function. So the first thing we do is get some user input. Then we call game.update. Game.update takes care of moving the player, takes care of all the world collision. And inside of the game.update function is the world.update function. So let's go ahead and take a look at world.update real quick. Already inside a world, game.world.prototype. So this is the game.world.update function, which is called inside of the game.update function, which we're calling right here. So basically, this function is going to call this function. So first thing we do is update the player's position. We collide the player with the world. This refers to game.world. So we're going to collide the player with the world, so all the tiles. And then we're going to come down here and we're going to loop through all the doors in the world, in the current region or zone of the world. We're going to get each door, and we're going to test for collision with the door. And it's just basic rectangular collision. I'll cover it in the next part of the video. Basically, if we do collide with the door, so if the player actually collides with the door, we're going to set this .door or game.world.door equal to that door that we just collided with. So normally this .door is undefined. So out here in our update function, which is called on every frame, we're going to test to see if game.world.door is not equal to undefined. And the only time it's not equal to undefined is when for a split second we actually walk into it. And then this if statement returns true, and we go ahead and load the world that was specified by whatever door we collided with. So let's just go through this real quick and see what happens. The first thing that happens when I run into a door, so if I run into a door, the first thing that happens is I stop the engine. I then make a request with request JSON to whatever zone that door brings you to. So if I come up here into my zone00.json, we're in zone 00. The destination zone for this specific door, located at an X of 192, which is about there, and a Y of 64, which is about there, has a width and height of 16. So right off the right of the screen here is a box that's about 16 by 16 pixels. And when I collide with it, it's going to load zone 01, and it's going to put the player at destination X of 0, and -1 just means we're not going to use destination Y. So the player's Y destination remains the same, but I'll get into that in the next part. So basically, we're going to request the destination zone specified by that door. So this door here that we're about to walk in, right to the right of the player, will tell us to go to world or zone 01. So when I walk into it, this code loads up zone 01. Pretty simple. The same thing that we did for the initial level load, we're just doing again right here. Even have the same arrow function with the zone parameter specified inside. Then inside of our callback after request JSON, requests the level data. The server gives it back to us in text format. It parses that into a JSON object, called zone and hands it back to us, we're just going to call game.world.setup, and it's going to get all the information out of the level file and put it on the screen, basically. So there is one difference this time, however, because now we're going to have to use some information from a specific door. So let me go back inside the game.world.setup function real quick. I'm going to scroll up to it. Right here, game.world.setup. And we check for the case that we are colliding with a door. Because remember, when we enter into collision with the door, we set the world's this.door property equal to the door. So when we call setup, this.door is actually going to be equal to whatever door we just collided with. So if I come over here and collide with the door that's right over here, it's going to be equal to that door that I just collided with. And it's just going to set the player's X and Y center position to whatever the door's destination X and Y values were. And that's it, really simple. Everything else works the same as the initial level load. The only difference is when you walk into a specific door, you reposition the player according to that door's destination X and destination Y. So stay tuned for the next part where I'm going to talk about the door class specifically, the collision, and all that kind of good stuff. Now I want to take a look at what a door actually is. So if I zoom in here, I'm going to look at what a door is inside of my zone00.json file. I've got an X position and a Y position, a width and a height. So basically my door is just a rectangular region on the screen somewhere that the player object can collide with. Then I also have a destination zone. That's going to be where the player is going to go, what level I'm going to load if the player hits the door. And I have a destination X and a destination Y for the player as well. So this is where I'm going to put the player in the newly loaded zone when it loads. If I have a -1, that just means destination Y does not get used and the player's Y position remains the same. Same thing for X. If I have a -1, the destination X position isn't going to be used. The player's X position is going to remain the same. So we can see this functionality over here if I fall into this world. I'm not being repositioned on the Y-axis, or on the X-axis rather, because I don't need to be. I just want to fall right through and naturally have my player end up where he has to be based on where he was in the previous level. I don't want to jump through this floor door right here and end up at the very start of the door over here in the next level if I jump through over here. Like if I jump through right here, I don't want to come out in this world right here because it just wouldn't look right. So that's the only reason I have a -1 there. But anyway, let's look at the door class, the game.world.door class, and actually see what that looks like in the collision code that I'm using to have the player and the door actually collide. So if I could find that, wherever that is, I'm going to scroll. Hopefully I'll come across it soon. This is it right here. So it's a really simple object. I'm going to correct that small formatting error there. Really tiny object. Basically is the same exact thing as this right here. It just has a prototype defined with the collide object function inside of it. So this is the door class, and I'm going to call object on it. Object, all it is a rectangle class that has some functions for helping me determine the sides of a rectangle. So it has functions like get left, get right, get top, get bottom. Just defining a rectangle here, inheriting from the object class. Then I'm going to set the destination X, Y, and zone to whatever those are from the door object that we hand in. And that's just going to be whatever is defined inside of the zone file. Then inside of the prototype, I have a function called collide object, and that's just going to test to see if the object's center points are inside of the rectangular region of the door. So this code right here just tests to see if the player is not colliding with the door. If he's not, then I'm going to return false, and that means we didn't have a collision with the door. If any of this is true, or actually if any of this is false, then we know that we have collided with the door, and in that case, we're going to return true. So where do we actually use this? That's going to be inside of the world.update function. So if I come down here to world.update right here, there we go. Okay, so inside of world.update, I have all the doors defined inside of my world.doors array. I'm going to loop through every door in that array. I'm going to get each individual door. I'm going to test to see if the door is colliding with the player object. And if it is, I'm just going to set the world's door property equal to that door. And then, just like in the last part, we're going to go into the update function for our main game loop. And inside of that, we're going to have an if statement that just checks to see, is game.world.door defined? And the only time it's defined is right after we collide with the door. So we're going to stop the engine. We're going to load the level defined by the door's destination zone more specifically. We're going to set up that zone in game.world.setup, and we're going to restart our engine. Now, inside of setup, and I know I'm recapping stuff that I just talked about, but inside of setup, we have, this is the inside of the setup function, we have an if statement that just checks to see, is this.door or game.world.door defined? Is it not undefined? If it's defined and we have a door in there, we're going to set the player's X and Y coordinates equal to whatever those were defined as by the door object. And if it's not equal to -1, then we know we can set it up. If it is equal to -1, we just leave it alone. So that's like in this case here, where I'm not changing the player's X position. So for both of these doors, this door up here and this door down here for each level respectively, the destination X position for that door is going to be set to -1 because I only want to change the player character's Y position. This way I don't have him jump through here and start out over here on this door. So that's basically it. That's how I define my door objects, and that's how to load levels with doors. In this video, I talked about how to create level data using JSON, how to load it, and how to use it to populate the game world. I also talked about collision between doors and the player object and how to trigger a level load by walking into a door. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to post them, and of course, like and subscribe for more videos. And I'll see you guys next time.